everybody. Welcome to Your Own Pathway Therapy Conversations. Here, we speak on the topics that we've been conditioned to stay quiet about and the ones that rock the boat. But here, nope, we're not protecting the silence and we're breaking it. So let's own it. So today's episode was an episode I really had to think if I was going to put it in therapy conversations or in my other um, playlists, Your Own Pathway Healing. And today's episode, I wanted to kind of look at everything going on and how so much of the outward world and external world impacts us as people. And today's episode asks, not asks, but asks, what if the problem is in you? And how so much of our lives, how systematic strain becomes personal pain. And again, I asked, what if the problem isn't you? In therapy and the work that we do, we ask clients a lot, what is going on within you? And we don't ask them what if the problem isn't you? Of course, we want our clients to take accountability, but there are so many things outside of their control that's one of the things that really work with them on. So, what if the problem isn't all you, I should say? What if your burnout, your anxiety, your exhaustion, your grief, all of that, and the sense of being behind is not simply a personal failure? And what if some of the things that you're carrying make sense in the conditions that you're living in, that we're all living in? So, today's episode is about something we need to talk about more honestly. Many systematic problems are being turned into personal problems. And when that happens, people suffer twice. First, from the actual burden, then from believing that they are the burden. Especially right now, in 2026, let's be honest, things are chaotic. And because of that chaos, many people are feeling real under pressure. There's the economic pressure, there's a workplace pressure, there's a relational pressure, there's family pressure, and there is chronic uncertainty. There are changing expectations. There is instability in the world around them and around us. And yet, through all of this, the message remains is that people often receive right now is simple: work harder, cope better, be stronger, think more positively. And you know what? You need to learn how to manage yourself better. And most importantly, fix yourself. So, again, I want to be clear. Yes, there is definitely personal responsibility, and that certainly matters. Growth matters, healing matters, choices matter. And yet, that is not the whole picture because not every struggle begins inside the person. Sometimes the symptom is personal, but the source is also systematic. Because what sometimes hurt privately was actually shaped publicly. And so, moving on, I want to talk about how systems become personal. When larger systems create chronic pressure, unrealistic demands, barriers, mixed messages, instability, and especially through all of this, and still have lack of support, let's be honest, those conditions do not stay just out there. What happens? They travel inward. They often show up as anxiety, as again, the burnout, exhaustion, shame, self doubt. And I admit this, sometimes I have brain fog and the irritability. And through all of this, unfortunately, there is hopelessness. And with that hopelessness has leads to emotional shutdown, feeling like you should be doing better than you are. And because those are symptoms that are happening inside the person, many people assume the problem started there too. But that is not always true. Sometimes the body is reacting to pressure. Sometimes the mind is reacting to overload. Sometimes emotions are reacting to prolonged strain. Now, the symptoms may be personal, but that does not mean that the source is only personal. So, you know, even in therapy, as clinicians, as social workers, and we often meet with one person, one client at a time. And because one person is sitting in the room, it can be easy to frame everything as individual issues. But the thing is, no one person exists in isolation. Every person lives inside environments and systems that shape well being. We have family systems, we have work systems, we have the economic systems, we have the cultural expectations, and we have relationship dynamics. And of course, we have the trauma history with current responsibilities. When we really understand someone's life, the picture becomes so much more nuanced. And what may look like low motivation, maybe exhaustion. What looks like avoidance may actually be fear. And what looks like poor coping may actually be chronic overload. And so a lot of this is framed as failure. And failure may include barriers outside of people's control. Actually, a lot of failures may be outside of people's control. Now, again, I want to reinforce that this does not remove agency, responsibility, or accountability. And this actually restores the context. So, as a clinician, and for those who are watching this who are also clinicians, not every symptom is caused by symptoms alone. I want to clarify that. And not every struggle comes only from the environment. Sometimes anxiety connects to trauma. Sometimes depression includes biological factors. Sometimes people carry attachment wounds because of unresolved grief or learned patterns that shape how they respond to stress. All of that matters. But what also matters is understanding how internal history and external conditions interact. Because many people are trying to heal old wounds while also living inside present day pressure. And I'm sure all of us can relate to that. And if we ignore either side of the equation, we often miss the full picture. Because the thing is, healing becomes more effective when we understand both the person and the environment. Classic social work right there. When we oversimplify suffering, we often mistreat it. So, moving on, one of the things I think all of us, working with my clients, we talk about resilience. Oh, this client is so resilient. And especially working with children, we often say, oh, but children are so resilient. And yes, resilience is great. And resilience can be real, resilience can be meaningful. And yet, there's also the trap of the resilience trap. Yes. So, what I mean by this is that, yes, it can be beautiful to be resilient, it can be meaningful. And yes, kids and people can be adapting and be in recovery and have strength and perseverance. But the thing is, resilience can also be misused. Sometimes resilience becomes the expectation that people should always be absorbing. What should have been changed? What needs to be keep enduring, keep surviving, keep functioning under pressure, keep adapting to unhealthy conditions. And so what happens when the environment becomes too much and resilience is no longer an option? Then the story becomes, well, you know what? They're not strong enough. They're not disciplined enough. They're just not resilient enough. How many of us have heard that? I know I have. But even through all this, what should the question be? The question should be, why does this person need this much resilience just to get through normal life? Why? Why are some people repeatedly asked to survive while others are protected from? Resilience, yes, of course, matters. That is, but that, what that does is it reduces to what people are forced to be resilient against. And so, what does this do? So, moving on, I want to talk about how pressure becomes symptoms. So, when pressure is intense, when it's chronic or paired with little recovery, the mind and the body respond, of course. And that can look like difficulty concentrating. Let's talk about how pressure becomes symptoms. When pressure is so intense or chronic, or it's paired with little recovery, the mind and the body respond, of course. And what does this look like? This can look like difficulty concentrating, having sleep disturbance, irritability, emotional reactivity, fatigue, numbness, avoidance, hopelessness, all of that. And these responses are not always signs of weakness. Often, they are signs that a system, internal, external, or both, has been under too much strain for too long. That is why accurate assessment matters, because the same symptoms can come from different sources. And treatment becomes stronger when we understand the source, not just the symptom. So let's talk about the hidden human cost. When systematic strain becomes a personal problem, the cost becomes deeply the human cost. People lose energy, they lose confidence, they lose patience, they lose focus, they lose trust in themselves. And they start asking, why can't I keep up? Why is everything so hard for me? Why am I so damn tired? Why does everyone else seem fine? Newsflash for you, not everybody's fine. People are probably thinking it. And often, we hear this comparison is a thief of joy. But what happens? People compare. People compare their private burden to someone else's public image. And that comparison becomes its own form of suffering. And this leads me to talk about grief. Part of my work was I did a lot of grief and loss, and grief and loss extends beyond the loss of a loved one or someone who is important to you. Grief is, I think, what many people right now, especially, are carrying quietly. Grief for where they thought that they would be by now. Many of us were given invisible timelines. And by this age, by a certain age, you should have everything figured out. I'm going to tell you right now, for anybody who's watching this, I'm over 40 and I actually just found myself after when I hit 40. So if you feel you're under 40 and you feel like nothing's working out for you, don't worry. Instead of a midlife crisis, I consider this part of life a midlife awakening. And we're told by certain ages you should own a home, you should be married, have kids, you should be partnered, and you should be successful at this age. And by this age you should be ahead. The thing is, when life does not match a timeline, many people internalize it, thinking I'm behind, I failed, something is wrong with me, I missed my chance. But then I want to remind everybody out there who is feeling behind, many delays are not just personal. They can be shaped by economics, unequal access, health challenges, family obligations, and systematic barriers. The cost of surviving hard seasons, and we are living a really hard season right now. Not every delayed milestone is personal failure. I want to remind all of you of that. Sometimes it is life unfolding under real conditions. And as therapists, and as a therapist, and for anybody who else is also watching this was a therapist, one of the things that we often help people through is the gap between expectations and current reality. The life that they thought that they would have and the timeline that they imagined, the version of themselves that they expected to be by now. When reality looks different, there can be grief, real grief, not only for what happened, but for what did not happen. That grief deserves compassion. But therapy also helps people ask, what is within my control? What is outside of my control right now? What needs to be grieved? What can still be built? And what matters in this season of life? Because healing is not just about living in the past, and it is not just about living in the future either. It is learning how to be with your life as it is while still holding hope, what can come next. And that can mean not giving up. And that is grounded living right there. And this is why, as therapists, we play such an important role, because the work that we do not only helps to reduce symptoms, but it is also to help people make sense of their experience. That may include separating facts from shame, identifying what is within your control, again, and what is not, grieving what was lost, but also building healthier boundaries and learning to regulate the nervous system. And most importantly, challenging the false standards and rebuilding the self trust. Healing is not just about becoming perfect, not at all. It is about becoming more grounded, more honest, and more aligned with reality. And I want to end with hope, because through all of this, I feel like it was like very doomed. And I want to end this episode with hope. Because when people carry pressure for too long, hopelessness definitely sets in. They begin to think, you know what is the point? Like, what is the point? Maybe I am just lazy. Maybe I am behind forever. Maybe everybody else got all figured out except me. But one form of healing is this: stop measuring yourself by false standards. Stop assuming everybody else's timeline should be yours. Stop treating delays as outcomes as proof of your worthlessness. As I'm talking about all this, I'm reminded of my own path too, as a therapist who is now doing these things, like even doing these episodes. And this is why I named my channels and everything I'm doing is your own pathway. Because I realize that your path may be different. My path was definitely different. And so, who's ever watching this who may feel a certain way, as a therapist, as a person, and even as we're helping people, we have our own path and we're helping clients forge their own path, your own pathway. And be reminded that your timing may be different, your season may be different, but that does not mean your life has less value. Hope is not always getting everything you expected. Sometimes hope is releasing what was never meant to define you. So, in closing this episode, if life has felt heavier than it should, I want you to hear this. You may still have work to do. The things we always have work to do. But you may not be the whole problem. Believe it or not, you're not the problem. Kind of reminds me of, is it Taylor Swift's song? Is it me? Am I the problem? Sometimes the symptom is personal. Yeah, sometimes the source is systematic. And often it is both. And sometimes peace begins when we stop fighting reality long enough to meet ourselves in the present. So, if this episode or this conversation resonated with you or with anybody that you know, please share it with someone who has been blaming themselves for more than they were ever meant to carry. That is all I have for this week's episode, and I hope you enjoyed this. And again, this is your own pathway, therapy conversations, where we no longer are silence and we own it. As always, take care of yourselves, stay safe. I will see you all next time. Bye.